Welcome to Last Minute Lecture. This free chapter overview is designed to help students review and understand key concepts. These summaries supplement, not replace, the original textbook and may not be redistributed or resold. For complete coverage, always consult the official text.
Welcome to this special deep dive from the Last Minute Lecture team. Today we're tackling something that I think trips up a lot of nursing students.
Oh, absolutely. It's a notoriously tough topic.
Right. Because usually when we talk about a diagnosis, it's pretty binary. You break your arm, the x-ray shows a crack, and that's it. It's broken.
Yeah, we definitely gravitate toward things we could just, visually categorize. It makes treatment feel straightforward.
But then you step into the cardiovascular system, and that static x-ray is kind of useless. We aren't looking at a fixed structure.
No, not at all. It's this incredibly dynamic, pressurized, ever-changing fluid network.
Exactly. And if you are a nursing student gearing up for pharmacology exams or, clinical rotations, this is where the puzzle gets really complex.
It does, which is why today's mission is so important.
Right. We are completely unpacking Chapter 49 of Lenny's Pharmacology for Nursing Care, the chapter on vasodilators. Our goal is to translate all this dense drug information into clear, bedside-ready knowledge.
And we're going to follow the chapter's exact order, too, starting with the basic concepts of how these drugs work and then moving into the heavy hitters.
Yeah, so to set the stage, let's reframe how we visualize this. Think of the cardiovascular system as this massive, high-speed traffic network.
I like that analogy. It's much better than the old plumbing one.
Right. So the heart is the central city. The arterials are the outbound highways, and the veins are the inbound highways.
And that ties perfectly into the first major concept in the text, which is selectivity. Table 49.2 maps this out. You have to know where these drugs act.
Because their location dictates everything, right?
Yeah.
Like if a drug selectively dilates arterioles, it's opening up extra lanes on the outbound highway.
Exactly. And hemodynamically, that decreases cardiac afterload. By reducing that outbound traffic resistance, the heart doesn't have to work nearly as hard.
It doesn't have to push against all that pressure.
Right, which increases cardiac output and tissue perfusion.
Okay, so that's the arterioles. But what if we look at the other side of that selectivity map? The veins.
Dilating the veins is like widening those inbound lanes. The veins are our capacitance vessels. When you widen them, the blood basically slows down and pools there.
So less traffic rushes back into the central city at once.
Exactly. And that decreases cardiac preload. You reduce ventricular filling, which means there's less stretch on the ventricular muscle before it contracts.
Which ultimately lowers the force of the contraction itself. It's a brilliant systemic manipulation.
It really is. And depending on the selectivity, we use them for things like essential hypertension, hypertensive crisis, angina, heart failure.
All the big cardiovascular players.
Right.
But manipulating that traffic network triggers alarms in the body.
Oh, massive alarms. The body does not like us messing with its pressure.
Right. And because we understand those hemodynamics, we can perfectly predict the blowback, the major adverse effects.
Which brings us to the first big one. Postural or orthostatic hypotension.
Yeah, this is huge. The textbook actually has a crucial safety alert about vasodilators and falls.
Because if you give a drug that relaxes the veins, you're expanding that venous capacity.
Right.
When your patient stands up,
gravity just takes over.
Completely. Blood pools in the lower extremities, venous return plummets, and cerebral perfusion just falls off a cliff.
Meaning dizziness, lightheadedness, and potentially fainting. So as a nurse, you have to preempt the fall.
Absolutely. It's all about patient education, teaching them to avoid abrupt transitions from lying to sitting and, sitting to standing.
Okay, so that's the gravity problem. But there's a second major adverse effect, right? Reflex tachycardia.
Yes. And this is a fascinating example of the body's survival instincts actually working against our therapeutic goals.
This is the baroreceptor reflex, isn't it?
Exactly. You give a vasodilator, arterial pressure drops. The baroreceptors in the aortic arch and carotid sinus sense that drop instantly.
Because they're basically stretch receptors, right?
And they tell the medulla's vasomotor center, hey, we're losing pressure. The medulla panics. It thinks you're bleeding out.
Oh, wow. So it doesn't know we gave a medication?
Not at all. It just fires sympathetic impulses to flood the heart, telling it to beat faster to compensate.
But wait, doesn't a faster heart rate defeat the whole purpose of lowering the blood pressure to begin with?
It completely defeats it. It increases cardiac oxygen demand massively.
So how do we fix that? We can't just let the heart race.
We have to outsmart the medulla. You'll almost always see a beta blocker, like metoprolol, ordered alongside a vasodilator.
Ah, Okay, so the beta blocker sits on the heart's receptors and acts like a shield against that sympathetic surge.
Exactly. The medulla can scream all at once, but the reflex tachycardia is blocked.
That is so cool. But the nervous system isn't the only thing fighting us. What about fluid retention?
Right, the kidneys. The body's second defense mechanism. When blood pressure drops, the kidneys secrete renin, kicking off the whole RAAS cascade.
The renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system.
Right. So aldosterone makes the kidneys hold onto sodium, and water follows sodium.
Just desperately trying to expand blood volume to get the pressure back up.
Exactly. Which would cancel out the vasodilator entirely. So clinically, a nurse will almost always see a diuretic prescribed concurrently to pull that extra fluid off.
Okay, so we have our rules of engagement. We know the body fights back with tachycardia and fluid retention. Let's look at the first specific drug on the list.
Hydralazine.
Right, hydralazine. Now, this one is a selective arterial dilator, correct?
It is. It directly acts on the vascular smooth muscle of the arterioles and leaves the veins alone.
So because it spares the veins, the risk of that postural hypotension is actually pretty minimal.
Exactly. We use it orally for essential hypertension and intravenously for severe hypertensive crises.
And the text points out it's used in heart failure too, right? In combination with something else.
Yes, Bidil. It's hydralazine combined with isosorbide dinitrate, which is a vein dilator. Together, they reduce afterload and preload.
But here is where it gets really interesting to me. The pharmacokinetics. Because genetics play a massive role here with hydralazine.
They do. It all comes down to acetylation, which is how the liver metabolizes and inactivates the drug.
Right. People are wired as either rapid acetylators or slow acetylators.
Exactly. And if a patient is a slow acetylator, their liver takes way too long to clear the drug.
So it just builds up in their system.
Yes. And that toxic accumulation can lead to a really unique, severe adverse effect, an SLE-like syndrome.
SLE, like systemic lupus erythematosus.
Exactly like it.
Yeah.
The patient gets muscle and joint pain, fever, nephritis, pericarditis.
Wait, really? A blood pressure medication triggers an autoimmune disease?
It's an idiosyncratic reaction. It's most common in slow acetylators, or if the dose is just too high, like over 200 milligrams a day.
So as a nurse, if your patient complains of new, unexplained joint pain, you don't just hand them an NSAID.
No, you have to suspect the syndrome immediately. If it's confirmed, the hydralazine has to be discontinued.
Wow, okay. But hydralazine has its limits, right? What happens when a patient's hypertension is just incredibly severe and hydralazine doesn't work?
That's when you bring in the heavy hitter, Minoxidil.
Minoxidil. This one is intense. It's also an arterial dilator, but the mechanism is different.
Very different. Minoxidil is a prodrug. The liver converts it to minoxidil sulfate, which then opens potassium channels in the vascular smooth muscle.
Potassium channels.
Yeah. Potassium rushes out of the cell, which hyperpolarizes the membrane. Basically, the muscle cell loses its ability to contract.
It's essentially like unplugging the smooth muscle's electrical cord so it goes completely limp.
That's a great way to put it. The vasodilation is profound.
But because it's so profound, the body's reaction is violent, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The reflex tachycardia is extreme, and the sodium and water retention is off the charts.
So a standard thiazide diuretic won't touch that volume overload.
Not a chance. You have to use loop diuretics like furosemide.
Yeah.
Sometimes the fluid retention is so severe it causes cardiac decompensation.
I read that it can even lead to dialysis if the diuretics fail.
Yes, or you just have to stop the minoxidil entirely. And all that fluid can cause pericardial effusion.
Fluid accumulating around the heart.
Right. And if too much builds up, it physically compresses the heart cardiac tamponade. The heart literally can't fill with blood.
It's pumping empty. That's a surgical emergency.
It requires immediate drainage, yes.
Okay, so minoxidil is dangerous. But I have to bring up the fascinating cosmetic side effect mentioned in the book. Hypertrichosis.
Ah, yes. Excessive hair growth.
About 80% of patients grow excessive hair on their face, arms, legs, and back after like 4 weeks on this drug.
It's a huge cosmetic shift. It forces resting hair follicles into the active growth phase.
Which is why topical minoxidil is sold as Rogaine for hair growth.
Exactly. But clinically, for someone taking this for severe hypertension, it's a massive compliance hurdle.
Right, because if they hate the side effects, they'll just stop taking their life-saving medication.
Which means discussing hair removal strategies like shaving or depilatories isn't superficial. It's a vital nursing intervention to keep them compliant.
That makes total sense. Okay, let's shift gears from chronic severe hypertension to an actual emergency.
The hypertensive crisis.
Right. A patient rolls in, they're crashing, organs are failing, minoxidil is too slow. What do we use?
We reach for the fastest acting vasodilator available, sodium nitroprusside.
And before we dive into how it works, let's look at the lifespan chart in the text to see who actually gets this drug safely.
Good idea. So infants and children can safely use hydralazine and nitroprusside in smaller weight-based doses.
What about pregnancy?
Pregnant patients have to carefully weigh the risks, but breastfeeding patients should definitely avoid nitroprusside due to infant risks.
And older adults.
Hypervigilance is required. With age-related organ decline and polypharmacy, the risk for catastrophic falls from orthostatic hypotension is huge.
Okay, so back to the drug itself. Nitroprusside, how is it different from the first two?
Well, unlike hydralazine and minoxidil, nitroprusside dilates both arterioles and veins.
So it drops afterload and preload simultaneously?
Yes. And curiously, the reflex tachycardia is minimal, but it's only given via dedicated IV infusion.
Table 49.3 shows it starts at 0.3 micrograms per kilogram per minute.
Right, and it acts instantly. The cool part is, minutes after you turn the IV off, the blood pressure returns to where it was.
It offers exact minute-by-minute control, and the cellular mechanism is similar to nitroglycerin.
Right. Yes. It releases nitric oxide, which causes vasodilation.
Okay, but here is my big question. The textbook says the nitroprusside molecule contains 5 cyanide groups.
It does.
How is it safe to pump a cyanide compound into a patient?
It sounds crazy, but the liver usually handles it. When it metabolizes into nitric oxide and cyanide, the liver uses an enzyme and a cofactor called thiosulfate to detoxify the cyanide.
Detoxifies it into what?
Into thiocyanate, which is much less toxic, and then the kidneys eliminate it.
So the safety relies entirely on the liver and kidneys doing their jobs perfectly. What are the danger zones for a nurse here?
First, infusing it too fast. If you go over 5 micrograms per kilogram per minute, you deplete the liver's thiosulfate.
And then free cyanide builds up.
Exactly, causing methyl cyanide poisoning. The same happens if the patient has severe liver disease.
What if the infusion rate is fine, but they're on it for a long time?
If they're on it for more than 3 days, or if they have kidney issues, the thiocyanate builds up. That causes thiocyanate toxicity.
Which affects the brain, right?
Yes. Disorientation, psychotic behavior, delirium. You have to monitor their plasma thiocyanate levels meticulously and keep them below 0.1 milligrams per milliliter.
That is serious hypervigilance. So let's bring all this dense pharmacology back to the bedside. Let's summarize the major nursing implications from the chapter.
Perfect. So the ultimate therapeutic goal is always decreasing blood pressure to prevent organ damage.
The first cue a nurse needs.
Obtain baseline heart rate and blood pressure before doing anything. You cannot administer these safely without a baseline.
Next, analyzing those cues and prioritizing hypotheses. Identifying the high-risk patients.
Right. Are they a slow acetylator? Then hydralazine is a huge risk. Have they failed safer drugs? Then minoxidil is justified.
And flagging liver or kidney disease before ever touching a nitroprusside drip.
Exactly.
So then we generate solutions and take action.
Which means co-administering beta blockers for the tachycardia and diuretics for the fluid retention.
Teaching patients to rise slowly so they don't faint.
Yes. And if you're running IV nitroprusside, monitoring blood pressure continuously, you might even co-administer thiosulfate to minimize those cyanide risks.
And don't forget advising on hair removal from Minoxidil to help with compliance.
Very true. Finally, evaluating outcomes. Continually monitoring for that appropriate decrease in blood pressure while making sure they aren't crossing into toxicity.
It's just a lot of moving parts. But, when you look at how we use these drugs, it really leaves you with a provocative thought about pharmacology.
How so?
Well, notice how the moment we give a vasodilator to help the heart, the body's compensatory mechanisms like the baroreceptors in the kidneys just instantly fight back to return to the baseline disease state.
It's a continuous tug of war.
Exactly. It shows that as a nurse, you aren't just administering a drug. You are actively managing this massive physiological brawl between the medication and the human body's survival instincts.
And you have to understand the mechanics of that brawl to keep the patient safe.
You really do. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Chapter 49. From the Last Minute Lecture team, we wish you good luck on your upcoming nursing exams and clinical rotations. You've got this.